I never expected the phone call to come at 6 in the morning, when the fog was still stretching across the fields like a waking animal. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a lukewarm cup of tea and a notebook full of estate documents. That's when my cousin Melissa called, voice thin, breathless, already rehearsed. "Aunt Claire," she began, "we need to talk about the farm. Mom says you're refusing to transfer it. She said Grandpa promised it to her. We might have to get lawyers involved." Lawyers. Over the farm that had been in my family for 3 generations. The farm I had cared for through droughts, storms, and the long quiet years of my father's decline. The farm my aunt, my father's younger sister Diane, hadn't set foot on in 18 years. My hand tightened around the mug, and I watched a crack of sunlight push through the fog outside my kitchen window. My father had been gone for 5 months, but his absence still moved through the house like a draft. I could almost hear him saying, with that dry voice of his, "Don't let your aunt bully you, Claire. Facts matter more than feelings." But facts were precisely what my aunt had always tried to outrun. I steadied my voice. "Your mother is mistaken. The will is clear." "That's not what she said," Melissa replied, and I could hear someone whispering in the background, my aunt feeding lines like a stage director in a high school play. "She said Grandpa told her the farm would be hers someday. She said you're trying to take what was rightfully promised." Promised. A word Diane used the way a magician uses misdirection. Confidently, theatrically, hoping no one looked too closely at the other hand. I closed my notebook. "Melissa," I said, "your mother is welcome to read the will herself." There was a pause. A long one. Then her voice hardened, just slightly. "She wants an appraisal done immediately. She says the farm's value should be calculated before she agrees to anything." My heart stilled. Because I already knew what Diane didn't. Every appraisal in our county is automatically billed to the requesting party. And every appraisal is documented, legally documented. Melissa continued, "Mom said she already submitted the request this morning. They'll be contacting you for access." My breath stopped. She requested it. In writing. For the first time in weeks, something inside me shifted. Not quite triumph, not yet relief, but a quiet click of inevitability, like a gear sliding into place. "Thank you for letting me know," I told her. But as I hung up the phone, a different sound echoed in my mind, the approaching hum of truth, slow but unstoppable. And I knew. This was only the beginning. Because when the appraisal bill finally arrived, it didn't come to me. It came addressed, without ambiguity, to my aunt. In her full legal name. "My name is Claire Whitmore, and I am 62 years old. I have lived on the Whitmore family farm my entire life, except for the 4 years I left for college and the 7 months I spent traveling after my divorce, trying to remember who I was beyond someone's wife. I am not a dramatic person by nature. I don't raise my voice. I don't escalate. I am the sort of woman who keeps tidy receipts, labeled folders, and a well-maintained garden. My revenge, if it can be called that, has always been quiet, anchored in facts, patience, and a belief that truth doesn't need volume to be powerful. I moved back to the farm when my father's health began to decline. He had been a widower for years, stubborn but gentle, one of the last people on earth who believed a handshake still meant something. In the evenings, when he sat by the old stone fireplace, he would tell stories about the early days. How he and my mother saved every dime to expand the north field. How my grandfather had nearly lost the property in the 1930s until the community helped rebuild the barn. How each generation had added something to the land, not taken from it. But there was always one story he never told. Why his sister Diane left and never returned. They hadn't spoken in over 18 years, not since she stormed out during an argument about their mother's estate. I was 44 then, old enough to understand the complexities of grief, but not yet wise enough to understand the complexities of ego. My father refused to gossip, but he gave me the only warning he ever offered. "Your aunt likes promises she never has to prove." After his funeral, when friends had gone home and the house had settled into its heavy silence, I found myself standing at his desk, holding his will. The farm, every acre, had been left entirely to me. No ambiguities. No contingencies. No shared ownership. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt responsible. I thought my aunt would call with condolences, maybe even a polite inquiry about family heirlooms. Instead, she resurfaced only when she sniffed the possibility of inheritance. And now, months later, there she was, claiming spoken promises, rewriting history, teaching her daughter to weaponize sentimentality. But I was not the same woman I was 18 years ago. Grief had sharpened me. Age had steadied me. And paperwork, well-organized, meticulously notarized paperwork, was its own kind of armor. Still, I didn't know then how far my aunt was willing to go, or how deeply her resentment ran. And I certainly didn't know what I would soon discover in my father's locked file cabinet, documents that would turn every one of her claims inside out. Growing up, Diane was the vibrant one, the youngest, the pretty one, the one who knew how to charm a room and exit it before anyone realized she had never intended to help clean up afterward. My father, older by 8 years, carried responsibility the way some men carry briefcases, habitually, almost instinctively. If Diane forgot a school form, he forged their mother's signature. If she dented the truck, he patched it before their father saw. If she spent money impulsively, he covered the gap quietly. Their parents passed young, one from illness, one from exhaustion and heartbreak, and so the two of them entered adulthood with mismatched expectations. My father believed in stewardship. Diane believed in entitlement. By the time I came along, their roles were fully formed. Family gatherings were always the same. Diane would arrive late, make a dramatic entrance, talk about plans she never intended to follow through on, and then drift away before the dishes were cleared. Meanwhile, my father and I would gather plates, scrape leftovers, and restore order. Melissa, her daughter, grew up watching this pattern, learning charm before responsibility, confidence before accountability. As for me, I became the quiet observer, the one who saw all the small fractures and pretended they weren't there. But everything changed when my grandmother died. Her estate wasn't large, just a modest savings account and a few valuable antiques, but Diane insisted she had been promised more. She accused my father of manipulating their mother, hiding documents, taking what should have been hers. It was the first time I saw my father raise his voice. It was also the last conversation they had for nearly 2 decades. I was young then. I believed time would eventually mend them. I believed misunderstandings could be untangled if everyone simply sat at the same table long enough. But time doesn't mend fractures built on denial. It deepens them. And so, as I stood in my kitchen the morning of that phone call, hearing Diane's claims echoed through her daughter, I realized something. My aunt didn't want justice. She wanted recognition, validation that she had been wronged, even if she hadn't. The farm, to her, wasn't soil and sweat and inheritance. It was leverage. A trophy she thought she had been denied. Meanwhile, my memories of the farm were practical and earthy. The smell of wet soil after summer storms, the scratch of hay against bare arms, the echoing quiet of winter mornings. I knew what it took to maintain this place. Diane did not. Over the next few days, I began sorting through my father's belongings more thoroughly, preparing for what I suspected might become a fight. That was when I found it, the small brass key taped beneath his desk drawer. A key I had never seen before. It fit perfectly into the old file cabinet he kept locked for decades. Inside were folders, photographs, letters, each one carefully arranged, each one a thread I had never pulled before. And in the very bottom drawer, beneath insurance papers and tax returns, was a document dated 23 years ago, one that bore both my grandmother's handwriting and a notarized signature. The document revealed a truth my aunt had spent half her life denying, and one that would unravel every claim she was now making. The document was titled Transfer of Intent for Real Property Responsibility. Not ownership. Responsibility. But it was unmistakably clear. My grandmother had designated my father as the sole heir to the farm, citing Diane's demonstrated disinterest in agricultural life and financial stewardship. The notarization date stunned me. It had been signed the year Diane moved out of state with a boyfriend she later claimed had held her back. This wasn't a conversation. This wasn't a promise. This was a legally recognized statement of intent, a precursor that later shaped my grandmother's will. And Diane had known about it. Her signature was on the witness line. My throat tightened. She had signed it. She had agreed to it. She had simply chosen, over time, to rewrite history into something more flattering. I sat there for a long moment, feeling the betrayal settle in my chest, not because she was making claims now, but because she had dragged her daughter into them. Melissa, bright and capable, deserved better than to inherit her mother's resentments. I stared at the document again, reading each line slowly. There was no loophole, no ambiguity, no way my aunt could claim ignorance. But the betrayal wasn't just in the past. 3 days later, I learned the full extent of her intentions. A letter arrived from a local attorney, a name I recognized from past family disputes. Inside was a formal request. Ms. Whitmore, please refrain from making any alterations, sales, or transfers related to the Whitmore farm until rightful ownership can be determined. Rightful ownership. I called the number at the bottom of the letter, calm but cold. The attorney spoke politely, but carefully. Your aunt believes she has a verbal promise from her father, he said. She intends to challenge the will. And she filed an appraisal request, I replied. There was a pause on the other end. Yes. She believes it will help establish the value of what she is owed. Owed. The entitlement in that word cut sharper than the letter itself. I hung up, set the letter aside, and opened my father's old calendar journal. A habit he'd kept for 50 years. Meticulous notes, dates, observations. And there it was. A passage from 13 years ago. Diane called asking for money again. Told her no. Reminded her she already signed away her claim to the farm years back. Claire will inherit what she's earned. My father rarely wrote emotionally. He wrote facts. And this was a fact he'd documented more than once. But none of it mattered unless I could present it properly. I needed a lawyer. I needed an organized timeline. And I needed patience, something Diane never had. Yet the true betrayal arrived the next morning, in a voicemail left at 2:17 a.m. Melissa's voice this time, slurred, angry, tired. Aunt Claire, why are you doing this? Mom says you're trying to erase her from the family. She says you're manipulating the documents, just like you manipulated Grandpa. You know the farm was supposed to be hers. Everyone knows it. Everyone. That word echoed. Because the next day, my aunt went public, with a Facebook post accusing me of stealing generational property and taking advantage of a dying man. The post spread. Neighbors called. Friends whispered. My aunt had declared war. And she didn't yet know the appraisal company had already processed her request, and the invoice, several $1,000s, was en route directly to her mailbox. I hired an attorney named Evelyn Shaw, a woman in her late 40s with a firm handshake and a talent for slicing through dramatics with calm precision. The kind of woman my father would have trusted. She listened carefully as I laid out every document, every note, every voicemail, every screenshot of my aunt's accusations. When I reached the part about the appraisal request, Evelyn leaned back in her chair, thoughtful. She submitted it in her name? Yes. And she acknowledged the farm wasn't hers yet. She asked them to value the property she expects to inherit. Evelyn smiled, just barely. Well, that's helpful. Over the next 2 weeks, we built a timeline so clear it could have been used for a documentary. At the 23-year-old notarized transfer of intent are my grandmother's will my father's estate documents. The calendar entries are voicemails from Melissa are screenshots of Diane's public accusations. The appraisal request filed in her name. And eventually the invoice, $3,480, also in her name. When the envelope arrived at her house, I didn't see it, of course. But I heard about it 20 minutes later. Melissa called. Her voice was shaking. Aunt Claire, what is this bill? Why did the appraisal company send Mom an invoice? They said she requested it. She told us you did. I kept my voice measured. Melissa, I haven't requested anything. Your mother filed the appraisal with her contact information. They sent the bill to the requester, as required. But she said, I know what she said. There was silence. Heavy, revealing silence. Then Melissa whispered, she told us the farm was legally hers. I didn't respond immediately, because any words I offered would either sound patronizing or cruel. Instead I said gently, you're welcome to see all the documents. Both of you. Melissa exhaled. I'll ask her. But I knew Diane wouldn't come. Pride was her currency. And she spent it recklessly. Later that week, Evelyn contacted Diane's attorney, informing him that all communication should now be routed through legal channels. Her voice, even over speakerphone, held a serene authority. If Ms. Whitmore continues posting defamatory statements, she said, we will file an injunction. And if she persists in claiming ownership, we will pursue recovery of legal fees, as permitted under estate defense statutes. Her attorney hesitated. Diane is emotional. You know how families can be. Emotion, Evelyn replied calmly, is not a legal argument. He had no response. But the true turning point came when Evelyn requested the appraisal report directly from the company. They provided a time-stamped document showing the requester's identity, the email verification, and Diane's signature confirming her authorization. It was irrefutable. Meanwhile, Diane continued posting online, unaware her own paper trail was quietly building a case against her. Friends messaged me, asking if I planned to respond publicly. I did not. Truth doesn't rush. It waits. And it always arrives. 2 days later, Diane showed up at my driveway, furious, unannounced, and holding the appraisal bill in her shaking hand. She didn't knock. She didn't call out. She marched straight up the gravel path, as if ownership could be claimed by the speed of one's footsteps. I stepped outside before she reached the porch. Her face was ruddy with anger, lips trembling, eyes bright with something deeper. Fear, maybe. Loss. Or the dawning realization that her story was collapsing. What is this? She snapped, waving the invoice like a battle flag. A bill, I said. For the appraisal you ordered. I didn't order anything. You forged this. You had them send it to me so you could humiliate me. I took a breath. Steady. Grounded. Diane, the company has your signed authorization. They recorded the call. She froze. Just for a moment, barely a second, but enough to reveal the truth. You think you're so much smarter than everyone, she whispered. You think this farm makes you important. No, I replied. This farm makes me responsible. She stepped closer, too close, the paper crumpling in her fist. I was promised this land. Your grandfather told me. My father, I corrected. And no. He didn't. Her mouth opened, but no words came. I continued gently, not cruelly, not triumphantly, just honestly. You signed the transfer of intent, Diane. You agreed to it. You gave up your claim more than 2 decades ago. She looked stunned, as if the past she had rewritten in her own mind was suddenly being read aloud. I didn't understand what I was signing, she whispered. You were 39. Her lips parted, but again, no argument followed. The wind shifted then, literally and figuratively. The oak branches rustled overhead, and for the first time, I saw not an antagonist but a woman drowning in her own choices, grasping at anything that resembled a lifeline, even if it meant grabbing mine. I softened my voice. Diane, this isn't about the farm. It never was. This is about you wanting something that proves someone loved you enough to give it. Her eyes filled with tears. Unexpected. Unscripted. But then, just as quickly, she hardened again. I'm not paying this bill. You requested the appraisal. Legally, it's yours. I'll tell them you tricked me. You can. I said quietly. But they have the recordings. She faltered. For the first time, she seemed to accept, not fully, not gracefully, but reluctantly, that she had cornered herself. She turned abruptly, storming back down the driveway. But halfway to her car, she stopped. She didn't look back when she spoke, but her voice carried in the cool air. "You'll regret this, Claire." I didn't respond. Because what she didn't know, what she couldn't yet see, was that her downfall wouldn't come from me. It would come from her own daughter. That night, Melissa showed up at my door, alone, tearful, and carrying a folder of her mother's printed Facebook posts. "Aunt Claire," she said, "I need to tell you something." Melissa stepped into my kitchen with a heaviness that didn't belong to someone her age. She sat at the table where I had received that first shocking phone call weeks earlier, and for a moment, she said nothing. Finally, she slid the folder toward me. "I printed everything Mom posted," she whispered. "She told people you manipulated Grandpa, that you took property that belonged to her. But I don't think I believe her anymore." She swallowed hard. "Mom's been lying to us. 4 years." I didn't reply immediately. Some truths should be spoken gently, or not at all. Melissa continued, voice cracking at the edges. "She showed us a story where she was the victim, the one everyone owed something to. But today, after that appraisal bill, she lost it. She blamed me for not stopping it. She said I was supposed to protect what's hers." Melissa looked down at her hands. That's when I realized she wasn't fighting for the farm. She was fighting for her pride. I nodded slowly. Pride can be expensive. Melissa wiped her eyes. "I want to see the documents." So I showed her everything. The notarized transfer of intent. My grandmother's will. My father's calendar entries. The appraisal request. Her mother's signature. The legal notices. The attorney's statements. When she finished reading, she sat back in her chair, shoulders shaking. "All this time," she whispered, "she blamed you. She blamed Grandpa. She blamed everyone except herself." I placed a hand over hers. "Melissa, your mother is responsible for her choices. Not you." She nodded, though the pain didn't lift. Over the next week, things unfolded quietly but inevitably. Her attorney withdrew. The appraisal company sent a final notice for payment. Neighbors stopped responding to her online posts. Friends began reaching out to me privately, apologizing for believing her accusations. And Diane, she grew silent. Pride is loud, but downfall is quiet. Melissa moved out temporarily, staying with a friend. She sent me updates. "Mom isn't talking. Mom says she was tricked. Mom says she'll never forgive any of us. Mom says she won't pay the appraisal." But the county didn't share her interest in dramatic refusal. 2 months later, the unpaid invoice was forwarded to collections, attached to her legal name. It affected her credit, her ability to refinance her home, even her car loan renewal. All because of a bill she insisted she didn't deserve. I had not raised a voice. I had not made a threat. I had not engaged publicly. I had simply documented, truthfully, patiently, and let the system do what it was designed to do. Evelyn called to summarize it succinctly. "Your aunt defeated herself." But consequences rarely arrive alone. One evening, Melissa texted, "Mom wants to talk. She says she needs to see you." Against Evelyn's advice, I agreed, not because I expected an apology, but because closure sometimes requires standing in the same room as the truth. When Diane arrived, she looked older, smaller. The bill, the backlash, the loss of her own narrative had taken something from her. She sat across from me and said nothing for a long time. Finally, she whispered, "I didn't think the appraisal would cost so much." It wasn't what I expected, but it was honest, in its own strange way. Then she added, quieter still, "I thought if I made enough noise, you'd give me something. Anything. To make me feel like I hadn't been left out." I didn't respond. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was asking for understanding. But the two were not the same. And just when I thought the confrontation was over, she asked a question I never expected. Could we start over? I didn't answer her right away. The question, could we start over, hung between us like a fragile bridge suspended over decades of resentment, denial, and rewritten memories. I studied her face. The woman who had once charmed every room now sat deflated, shoulders curved inward, eyes clouded with the weight of consequences she had never imagined facing. I don't know if starting over is possible, I said. But moving forward, maybe. She nodded, not satisfied, but accepting. We talked, slowly, cautiously, about the past. She admitted things in fragmented pieces. That she had always envied my relationship with my father, that she felt diminished by the farm she never cared for, that she resented the responsibility he entrusted to me because it reminded her she had never earned it. I listened. Not to excuse her, but to understand her. By the time she left, the sky had darkened. She didn't hug me. She didn't apologize directly. But she said quietly, "Thank you for hearing me." It was the closest she could come to contrition. Over the next month, life began to settle again. The farm slipped back into its steady rhythm. Morning frost on fence posts, the hum of the old tractor, the whisper of wheat in the breeze. I walked the fields each evening, feeling my father's presence in the land itself. Melissa reconciled with her mother slowly. But their conversations were sharper now, more honest. She set boundaries, something Diane had never allowed from anyone before. As for the online accusations, they faded. People forget drama as quickly as they consume it. The community returned to normal, though a few neighbors offered knowing looks, sympathy without prying. The appraisal bill was eventually paid. Not by me. Not by collections. But by Diane herself, quietly, begrudgingly, and without further complaint. Consequences, I realized, had done what arguments never could. I sent Evelyn a thank you basket, though she reminded me she was just doing her job. "You handled this with dignity," she said. Most people would have lashed out. But revenge, to me, had never been about retaliation. It was about clarity, boundaries, truth that didn't need to shout. And truth had done exactly what it needed to do. One crisp morning, while reorganizing the barn loft, I found an old photograph tucked between two beams. My father and Diane as children. Muddy, smiling, arms slung casually around each other's shoulders. For the first time, I felt a flicker of sadness for what they'd lost. Sibling relationships are complicated terrain, equal parts shared history and divergent paths. Sometimes resentment grows where love was supposed to live. I placed the photo in a small wooden box along with other family keepsakes. Not out of sentimentality, but out of a quiet respect for the parts of the story that came before the fractures. Life moved forward, as it always does. But something unexpected happened one afternoon when Melissa stopped by with a container of homemade soup. She hesitated before speaking. "Mom wants to invite you to Thanksgiving," she said. "She understands if you can't." I didn't commit. But I didn't refuse either. Healing is not a straight line. It's a series of small tolerances, gentle distances, and cautious re-entries. I knew we would never be close. But we no longer had to be enemies. In the weeks that followed, I tended to the land with renewed gratitude. Not because I had won it, but because I had preserved it. My father's voice returned to me in flashes, warm and steady. "You did right, Claire," I imagined him saying. "You kept the truth without losing yourself." And maybe, for the first time in a long while, I believed it. But before peace fully settled, something happened that forced me to confront the deeper meaning of it all. A letter arrived, written in my father's hand, dated the week before he died. The letter was addressed simply, "To Claire, when the time is right." I wasn't sure what right meant, but the moment I saw his handwriting, I knew I was ready to open it. His words were steady, reflective, unburdened by bitterness. "Claire, if you're reading this, it means conflict has found its way back into the family. I always knew it would. Your aunt is not a bad person, but she is a fearful one. Fear makes people rewrite the past until they believe it. I paused, letting that sink in. He continued. You will be tempted to defend yourself loudly. Don't. You never needed noise to make your point. You have always held truth the way other people hold weapons, with responsibility. I trust you to protect the farm not because it belongs to you, but because you belong to it. I felt my throat tighten. Then the final paragraph. Do not punish your aunt. Let her reveal herself. People eventually meet the consequences they try hardest to outrun. Stand firm, stay honest, and remember, justice is quiet. Justice is quiet. I folded the letter and placed it back in its envelope. A warmth settled in my chest, not triumph, not vindication, but clarity. In the weeks that followed, my relationship with Diane stabilized. Not affectionate, but civil. She no longer claimed the farm. She no longer posted accusations. She spoke cautiously, treating the truth not as an enemy but as a boundary she could no longer stretch. Melissa flourished outside the shadow of her mother's narratives. She pursued a graduate program, found her footing, and visited often, no longer as an emissary of conflict, but as family. As for me, I kept tending the land. My revenge had never been about causing harm. It had been about preserving truth, honoring legacy, and refusing to let someone else's distortions swallow my father's life's work. In the quiet evenings, when the sun dipped low across the fields, I felt something I hadn't in months: peace. I thought about the journey, how lies unravel on their own, how documented truth protects without aggression, how staying calm doesn't make you weak, it makes you unshakable. And so, for the viewers listening to my story now, here is the moral I learned. When someone builds their identity on what they believe they were owed, rather than what they earned, they will always see honesty as an attack. Do not let their confusion become your burden. Stand firm. Keep records. Speak truth softly. Let consequences do the shouting. Because in the end, justice doesn't need spectacle. Justice is quiet.